Welcome to this video. Thank you so much for tuning in, sharing in this now moment with myself and with one another. If you haven't seen these videos before, welcome, and welcome back if you have. My intention is unity and oneness and the highest levels of love light. This video is going to be a little bit of a recap on some observations I've made recently, and also go into a little bit of flow. So one of the things I wanted to share, I just did a video talking about paralleling and trust, integration, time. I'm looking at my notes, feeling, grounding, ancestors. So I invite you to go back and look at that if you feel called. And I had mentioned in there certain people who I've listened to over the years through this journey that inspired me. And I'm sure I left plenty out, but I just kind of popped a couple off the top of my head. And I have a tendency to share things and then get that validation from other people that are seeing the same thing. But what's so beautiful about it is they're seeing the same thing from their own perspective. And it may not be the same perspective that I hold. And I think that's something that's a really big message right now. And this is coming through from my guidance messages constantly is all about perspective, shifting our direction. We each hold a different angle. We're all different pieces of the puzzle. But I had been saying for the last, I don't know, few months, it's everything here now all at once, right? Everything is here now all at once. And it's not that it hasn't been. It's just that we were compartmentalized from one perspective and we weren't able to access it. Or we didn't necessarily hold the vibrational key in which to recognize that everything was here now all at once. And many of us are starting to feel into this multidimensionality. And what is multidimensionality? My friend Jess and Candace and I were talking the other day about it. And we each have a different perspective on what that means and what that looks like to us. When we view in through our third eye or our intuition, it looks slightly different. If I'm doing a reading for someone, I might be seeing things and expressing them in one way, and it might mean the same exact thing as another reader, but it might be explained in a completely different way because I see things through my prism, through my angle, from my experiences, and that's my filter. And that I think is difficult for a lot of people sometimes to not have an opinion or so for example, I have opinions about things. I have thoughts about things, and I'm human, and it's very difficult sometimes for me to stay in neutrality or to be neutral right away. I have to sometimes sit with a situation and really feel into my heart, open up that rose, right? The heart, that frequency of love, in order to view and ask, what is the perspective from each person who is involved in whatever it is, whether it's work related or politically related or anything. And so when I was so I'll just share back to the everything here now all at once. I recently had a video pop up from Lee Harris. So I think it's Lee Harris Energy. If you guys haven't watched him before, we all dip in and out, right? Sometimes I'll have people that send me a message and say, I haven't watched your videos in months, and it popped up. It was exactly what I needed to hear at the time. Or somebody might watch it and go, this is not what I'm into at all, delete. It just depends on where we're at in our perspective. So I roll in and out quite frequently from other light workers, humans that are sharing messages. But what happens is my universe brings me things to help bring me a sense of validation, which my ego likes to have as a human sometimes. But also it offers me, okay, here's the message you've been getting, and here's this other person who's getting the same message, but here's their perspective on it. Here's their angle on it. And I don't always resonate with what they're saying, but I also find it interesting and fascinating to see things and observe it from that perspective. And sometimes I can see it from a different angle and go, wow, that's really fascinating that they see it that way. We're seeing the same thing, and because of their life experiences, because of their knowledge, or because of the depth of their intuitive level, or the collective that they communicate with based on the dimension they're accessing, here's what they're getting about that same message. And so that's kind of the message of this video. We're all doing that. And the more we can start to recognize the value in that, the less we begin to need to hold our perspective as our own, and that's the only one. I had someone once kind of goad me a little bit because they were like, well, Carrie, surely you have your Carrie's perspective. Like, okay, you can see it from this angle, from this perspective, it looks like that way, from that perspective, it looks like that. But what is Carrie's perspective? And the funny thing is that really was helpful to me because my perspective is all of those perspectives. So sometimes that can be challenging too, because it's difficult. When I was younger, what that meant is it was difficult for me to make a decision. I couldn't make a decision because I could see the potentials of all these different angles, and I didn't know what Carrie's perspective was. And I still find that to be the case sometimes. But what I also recognize is because of that within me, my ability to see, not always, but sometimes, the ability to be able to see multiple angles and understand different variations, even in the way I look at words and language, it gives us the ability to open to and access a different variation that can actually give us more understanding of something we wouldn't have necessarily had understanding about before if we would have been locked into a particular idea about something, someone, some situation. If that makes sense? And I'll share a little personal experience. When I was younger, I was raised in a very religious and I'd say primarily Christian environment. That's how I was raised. And it was very strict. We went to church on certain days. We went to Bible study. We wore certain types of clothing. There were a lot of rules and a lot of holidays that we celebrated we fasted. I mean, it was a very strict type of religion. To make a long story short, at a particular stage in this church's lifetime, that they had a Bible college. It was out in California, so there was a huge following. The person who began the church passed away, and at that time, there were certain people who chose to stay with the church and the new pastor or leader of the church. And then there was another group that decided that they no longer agreed fully with these old teachings, and so they went a different direction. So it basically split, and the church split in half, and then slowly over time began to lose its steam. But it was a big deal for my family and for myself, having been indoctrinated in that particular belief system. And so one day when and I might have shared this story before for those of you who've seen these, but it's probably been a while. So I had been sitting in between my mother, who decided to stay old school, and a friend of hers who had chosen to go in another direction with the new variations of the church. And my mother argued her reasons why, and her friend argued her reasons why. And I literally felt like I was in the middle of a tennis match. And I probably was maybe about 13 at the time. I'm not really sure how old I was. I have difficulty remembering ages and times in my life, but it was a point in my life when I could make my own decisions, but I was still living at home. And so, of course, I still had to follow the path of my parents to a certain extent. And I would listen to my mother make her arguments, and I would listen to her friend, and I would listen to my mother and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, of course. And then her friend would say it, and I go, yeah, that makes sense. Yes, of course. And then they would start to make quotes from the Bible. Well, God says this and Jesus says that. And then her friend, my mother's friend, would say, well, this is what that really means though. And then my mother would argue and say, but no, this is what it really means. And after about an hour of this, I determined they were both right. And I had this moment of clarity at 13 or 12, or I don't know, whatever age it was, And let me explain what that looked like. I literally had a moment where I went into a meditative state because I just got so confused. I just dropped out by dropping in. And all of a sudden, I was observing myself, observing the two conversing, and I was observing the energy and the words of my mother and the energy of the words of her friend. And I was able to hear what they were both saying. And they both truly believed in what they were saying. And they were both making quotes, the same line from the same book. And each of them had a different perspective that to me was mind blowing because I never knew anything different than what I had been raised in or indoctrinated into. And to hear this new perspective from someone who had also believed in everything I had believed, but now had made a slight shift, it just rocked my world. And I was never the same after that. One might say that was one of the big moments that led me in the direction that I am in, that I'm in now with what I do, what I share. And so I realized in that moment I held both perspectives. I could see both perspectives. And I no longer had the Carrie perspective that I'd always had. It had changed. Yet I could also have the other as well. And I saw them both as having value. And there's something to that I'm sharing in this particular video that I feel is so relevant right now. We may not fully agree. My mother and her friend agreed to disagree, but they didn't like it. Yet they still remained friends for some time. And it was challenging for them, but and neither one of them were able to change or open or become more. They were both very set in their ways. But for me, at that moment, I decided neither one, because they both were. I backed out of all of it. And then I decided to get this expanded view of everything. And that's when I started asking questions and reading more books about all of this and starting to go into deep prayer and meditation. I went on my own inner journey to get my own answers. And that is another message that keeps coming up over and over again. Everything is here now all at once, to go back to that same thing. What are we going to do with it? And if it's everything, then how can we only believe in part of it and not look at the bigger picture that somebody else might have access to that we aren't seeing? We aren't all able to see everything necessarily, yet someone else might hold a piece of the puzzle that gives us something that shifts our reality in such a powerful way that it gives us the ability to access more of ourselves. And I feel like that's what many of us are doing for each other in our own way, even if it's something we don't agree with or we don't like. If we can hold our space and open our hearts to at least acknowledge that that person really believes in what they're saying and appreciate the human, we can work through and with and around. It's not a matter of cutting everything down so that we can express what we came here to express. So most of you that are watching this, I'm preaching to the choir, but this is the message that I keep getting over and over again. And it's really about navigating in this new reality in such a way that we're able to maintain our fluidity, yet somehow co-create this new reality with some structure, but making it a living, breathing structure and not a hard-edged mechanical structure. that we used to rely on. It's like shifting from the old computer to AI, right? So we're making that shift whether we like it or not. It's happening. It's already happened. Our phones are using it. Our websites are using it. The internet's using it. So if we keep saying no, 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 then we're butting heads up against something that already is here. So what we're being shown is to adapt. And it doesn't mean that we have to dive in and become part of a system that we don't agree with. But what it does mean is we are being called to express ourselves from the fullness of all that we are and let go of some of our limitations that we don't necessarily even realize are limitations. And I kind of went off into 5 different tangents there because this is a multidimensional message. I'm not just talking about one thing, everything here now all at once. I'm talking about the way we live our lives, how we think, what we believe in, who we believe in, how we believe reality functions, what we think about animals, what we think about the earth. I mean, asking ourselves, is there something deeper that I can go into here that maybe I wasn't aware of before? And sometimes by asking those questions, the answers will come and they may not be what we expected. So also recognizing that, because letting go of those expectations is also part of this journey and opening to maybe more than what we're expecting. What else? The other message that's coming through are, because everything is here now all at once, all the distortions are here, but all of the eye-opening ahas are here simultaneously. And when we hold a certain frequency for an extended period of time called coherence, the long wave, Dan Winter, a lot of people talk about this, not just Dan Winter, but I just happen to, I haven't watched his videos in a while, by the way, but if you just look at, thinking about this long wave, the rose, it's a rose, that's the heart, the chalice. It creates a vibratory frequency that actually is a spin that allows us to work with our information, environment, in each other in such a way, in such a wave, that we're able to navigate things easier. Logically, it seems like things are not easier. It seems like things are really messy for a lot of us. Some of us are like, I can dig this. I'm totally into this. Others are going, this is a mess. I don't like it. This is just utter chaos. Some people work well in chaos. So every person is different, again, in how they respond. You can go back and watch my last video. The guides kind of talk about prisms and angles and how that looks for different people. Lastly, I kind of want to end on the fact that this isn't something that's necessarily easy. As I talk about this, it's strange. That's the biggest word I can use right now to describe what many of us are feeling, because we're not used to working in this medium. And the medium is what you use for art, for creation. It's different. It's more fluid. It kind of slips through our fingertips and then makes us feel stuck. And we're not sure, how do I work with this? What am I supposed to create? I thought I wanted to create this, but now I don't even see that anymore. So getting into the heart, meditating, grounding, all of this becomes even more important. And so if you weren't doing it before, then now is the time, right? And if you were doing it before and things still don't feel easy, then the next message I've been getting is, then we just need to shift and change. There's something that is causing us to be in resistance, or that we are resisting, or that we're not letting go of, or that we're not opening to. So those are questions we can ask ourselves to show me, what is it that I'm resisting? What is it that I'm not open to? What is it that I need to let go of? Where am I feeling rigid? Where am I feeling insecure? Show me, universe. Just be aware. Careful what you ask for. You know, you're going to get it, especially now. And that's the other message that's coming through. I don't know if I talked about this, but when I was in the woods and there was all the gunshots going on, if you feel called to watch that light language video, I called it Fresh Mountain Share. I didn't realize it was hunting season. Thank you guys for sharing that with me, by the way. Carrie, you were there during hunting season. Hello. All right, that makes sense. It was very distracting. But having said that, where was I going with that? Squirrel. We just have to adapt. So we might have to change slightly how it is that we're doing things. I was doing a lot of fasting, but lately I am hungry all the time. I want to keep eating. So I have been eating. And I now am realizing at this stage, there is no diet that I'm going to follow, that somebody else is telling me I should do. My body is telling me exactly what I need to do, and so is yours. It took me time to get there. I've done parasite cleanses, which I've talked about. I've done heavy metal cleanses. I've done detoxes. I've retoxed. I've cut out certain things. I've added certain things. I was vegan for a while. You know, all of these things I've tried. And now I'm at the stage in my life where I'm going to eat what my body tells me to eat, which right now for me are fruits, vegetables, and seeds and nuts, and lots of water, ginger, lemons, coconut milk. Those are the things that my body is telling me that I need. Somebody else might be needing to flush out certain things from their body because they've been eating too much of that. Our skin suit is unique to our electrical charge, to our fingerprint, to our vibration, to our environment. So depending on where you live, depending on how hot the sun is, depending on how much grounding you're able to get or lack thereof, that can also affect your diet and what you need, depending on your bone density, how often you work out. These are all things to just recognize. We are not all meant to have the exact same diet from my perspective at this time. It's not to say that someday we might not be breatharians, if that's what they're called, or we're only going to be vegan, or we're only going to be this or that. Again, there are ways to get what you need from just plants and fruits and things like that. But for some people, they're not able to find that right now. And that could throw them completely into a downward spiral where it can be too much for them all at once. Sometimes it needs to be, let me rephrase that. I'm not here to tell anyone what to eat or what not to eat, because that's not my role. And I choose not to. And that's where I stand. So for some, everybody's different. So I'm just sharing what works for me. From my perspective, many perspectives, so on and so forth. So on that note, I guess that's going to be the video. I'll go into a flow in the next video. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that helps someone, and in love and light, guys. Namaste.